Never waste a good crisis.
40 CRPF jawans have been killed.
हमला नहीं है, ये युद्ध है।
देश के ठिकानों पर 1000 किलो बम गिराए गए हैं। पायलट लापता है।
Captain Abhinandan Varthaman has returned home.
Because what we weathered in the last week of February 2019 was a blood-curdling dogfight between India and Pakistan that could have nuked half the global population in and around South Asia. I concede there is an element of exaggeration in what I've just said. But you know what? Big wars often get triggered by tiny accidents of judgment. So it's better to exaggerate than run the risk of getting tortured in a nuclear winter. Yet a crisis of such proportions is also an opportunity to grow up, become a wiser person and country. So will India and Pakistan seize upon this dangerous wrinkle to become mature and moderate nuclear neighbors? We don't know. No evidence to that effect yet. But China, widely expected to continue its incendiary support to Pakistan, has certainly mellowed.
India struck the biggest training camp of the Jaish-e-Mohammed in Balakot.
On day one, after India claimed to have bombed and killed hundreds of Jaish-e-Mohammed terrorists at Balakot, China surprised everybody by endorsing the non-military, counter-terror, preemptive skin of our attack. China could have very easily reinforced Pakistan's protest against what Pakistan was calling an act of war. But China chose its words with utmost diplomatic finesse. As for India's claim on taking action against terrorism, well, fighting terrorism is a global practice. The very next day, after a face-to-face meeting with India's foreign minister, China and Russia announced in a formal statement terrorist groups cannot be supported and used in political and geopolitical goals. But you know, then the Chinese foreign minister seemed to deflect a bit of the heat by saying, "We believe that Pakistan has always been opposed to terrorism." While that seemed like a half step backward, China very deftly neutralized it at precisely the same moment by moving a half step forward thousands of miles away at UNSC in New York. It agreed to sign up for a French resolution condemning the Pulwama attack and, note this, and explicitly naming Jaish-e-Mohammed as its perpetrator. Yes, of course, it did insist on dropping the Pakistan-based prefix for JEM, but you know, for a country that had obdurately vetoed calling Masood Azhar a UN-designated global terrorist for a decade, it really was a fairly huge half stride forward. For a while now, China has been visibly moving towards the center in India-Pakistan ties. Remember, China is Pakistan's most important trading partner and biggest arms supplier. The 46 billion CPEC, that's the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which opened in late 2016, only reinforced the sense that China and Pakistan were teaming up against India. The corridor gives China very easy access to the Indian Ocean and beyond, and has jump-started Pakistan's decimated economy with extensive energy, infrastructure and industrial projects, making Islamabad even more beholden to Beijing. But is it time for India now to stay focused only on the positives? China, remember, can exert pressure on Islamabad in ways that benefit India, namely by curbing terrorism as we have explicitly requested. That's one key interest that we share. The Chinese fear Pakistan-based militants are inciting and abetting their own insurgent Muslim Uyghur population and have demanded tightened security along the CPEC. At Beijing's behest, Pakistan has already banned such terrorist groups as the Islamic Jihad Union and ETIM, whose leaders it extradited to China. Now, will anti-India groups be next to be so named? You know, remember, after militants killed 17 or some people say 19 Indian soldiers at Uri, Beijing publicly denied Pakistan's claims that China would always back them in Kashmir. That, remember, was the first flicker of change which got strengthened in the Pulwama-induced dogfight. So China's slowly hardening stance bodes very well for future counter-terrorism collaboration between us. The Indian Army and the PLA have been conducting annual what they call hand-in-hand counter-terrorism exercises for years. Citing a growing convergence of views on terror, they have discussed sharing best practices and even intelligence. Beijing has invested heavily to become an effective peacekeeping state, putting up 7% of the UN peacekeeping budget. That's more than Canada and Spain. The Chinese are engaged not only at a policy level, debating and designing resolutions, but also increasingly in on-the-ground operations, sending enabler units to provide the backbone and infrastructure for missions, as well as what's called tip-of-the-spear frontline forces in Haiti, Sudan, Liberia and Afghanistan. Nothing is better for India's or the world's security than an engaged China, which is assuming responsibilities of global leadership.